Hey, Tolkien Poppers. This episode is sponsored by Theology Beer Camp 2026. And Theology Beer Camp is just an awesome place where philosophers, theologians, and various types of pop culture nerds have been meeting on a yearly basis. And it is an awesome event organized by Trip Fuller from Homebrewed Christianity. And if you have heard me on the podcast or been a part of the Tolkien Heads class or even seen some of my writing, you know that bringing together niche philosophy, theology, and Tolkien is part of my whole thing. And that will be present at Theology Beer Camp too. So there'll be links in the show note, but get your tickets for Theology Beer Camp 2026. It will be in Kansas City, Missouri on October 8th through October 10th. Hope to see you there. What up, Tolkien Poppers? It's Nick here with another exciting episode of the podcast where in this episode we are joined by Dr. Thomas P. Hillman. And if you're not familiar with Tom is the author of the recent book, a couple years, Pity, Power, and Tolkien's Ring. And it has been for the past couple years the subject of just all types of internet hype, and it has dominated conversations with scholars and fans. And, Tom is just an awesome dude in general. And you will hear a little bit more about his Tolkien experience. You'll learn more about his book, the concepts of pity, power, in Tolkien. And we go a little bit beyond that in his biography and even some of the practical implications of exploring what pity and power means, not only in the lives of the members of the fellowship, but also in our real world. Because one of the things that Tom does is that he doesn't abstract the concepts of pity and power, because you know what, Tolkien didn't either, but he brings the concept and the action into the fold of the practical everyday life of readers of Tolkien. So I hope that this episode will get you stoked. I hope it will lead you to Tom's book and his other works. He also has a blog, and I will have those all in the show notes. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this latest episode with Dr. Thomas P. Hillman. What up, Tolkien Poppers? This is Nick here with another podcast episode. And, we are very just blessed here to be in the presence of an awesome guy here. Thomas P. Hillman, the author of Pity, Power, and Tolkien's Ring, retired classics teacher, Tolkien scholar, and just a cool guy. So just get excited for this conversation. But yeah, without further ado, Tom, how are you? Thanks for coming on, man.
I'm doing fine, Nick. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. I know. I think the first time that I had ever encountered, or at least been in your orbit, was, I think we're both long fans of the Prancing Pony podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when Sean and Alan brought up, Alas Not Me for the first time, and they kept bringing in your comments and your writings and stuff. And I was like, okay, this Tom guy's pretty cool. And then, dabbling in Tolkien scholarship, seeing your articles come out. And then, of course, later on, us kind of interacting in different groups and things, and seeing Pity, Power, and Tolkien Rings. It's just cool to, kind of have known you for at least a little bit.
Yeah. I've been following, the Prancing Pony. I got there like really early. I don't even know how. It's just like I think it was still like the first couple of episodes I somehow found them.
Dude.
And so it's like, okay, well, we were on the Mayflower there, we were on Vingalop, and but yeah, it was I love that podcast. It's a great podcast. It's a great podcast, all the way through, from the days of Alan and Sean up through now with the with when he's got Tauber on, or Sarah Brown on, or the obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy, or whoever he's got on, because he's had so many people on there, uh, and that it's just such a good podcast. And and they and it's just gotten it's so well produced and so well put together, that it's just a pleasure to know those guys. The first time Alan and Sean came to Myth Moot, they asked me to introduce them, which was a fun moment, and I compared them to. I said they were like the car talk of Tolkien podcasts, you know. But if you know car talk, you're older than you look. But yeah, it was.
No, man, I love car talk. That is such an apt
Yeah,
comparison.
because it was just like listen the banter between them. It was just like God, this is like car talk,
Yes, dude.
and yeah. So it was one of my happier analogies, So, but yeah, Alan and Sean and Katie and Jordan and everybody else who's involved and has been involved is just top notch. Just love them.
Yeah. I mean, it's just they've created such a unique Tolkien space where it has brought
Mhm.
together so many like internet people. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously it's just based on the internet, but we're talking like influencers and scholars and just fans, and it's
Mhm.
created this
Mhm.
hodgepodge of where like everyone can exist together and everyone kind of speaks the same language, without really stepping on each other's toes, which is just cool, and I think really hard to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, interviews. I know you've been interviewed on there along with a bunch of scholars, and that's really how I kind of got into Tolkien scholarship more and more, was
Mhm.
catching it early, learning that there was scholars and work like that, and I dove into. But one of the things that I think that they do, and I think a lot of people do, but we talked a little bit before the actual episode, is that a lot of people ask people what their Tolkien experience is, right? And
Mhm.
when
Mhm.
when people are asked that, everyone sort of lights up. Everyone's like, someone's asking me about
Mhm.
Tolkien and actually wants to hear my story. And
Mhm.
people tend to not get tired of it. So before we like dive into the nitty gritty of some of the more nerdy stuff, could you tell us about your Tolkien experience when you first encountered him, and then of course how has he continued to impact your life at this point?
Sure. Well, when I was a kid, I was really into ancient history, mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, Egyptian mythology, Norse mythology, King Arthur, and basically anything that had guys with swords in it, and stuff like that. And so, I eventually kind of found my way to the genre of sword and sorcery, and it was and also thereby found my way to Robert E. Howard and Conan the Barbarian, and they were publishing uh, for the first time in many years a lot of the different Conan stories uh, in uh, uh, in these whatever 50-cent paperbacks, with covers by Frank Frazetta, and all of that. And they were very eye catching, and I read them, and I loved them and everything. And then Marvel Comics came out with a Conan the Barbarian comic book. So I said, "Oh, I know that," and I started reading, the comic book from issue one. I still have it, actually, issue one,
Oh, that's so sick.
and yeah, 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 and and I had that, and I was reading it, and back in those days, so like we're talking like around 1970, 1971, Marvel Comics used to have letters to the editor, and people would write in and they would comment on very George R. R. Martin's actually got a famous letter that he wrote in about Fantastic Four, like, but that's like 5 years earlier than this. and and Stan Lee would write back, and so I was going through the comic, and and this one right here, Conan the Barbarian, number 6, June 1971, 15 cents. Uh, and I was going through it, and I got to the letters to the editor, and something like that, like in the back there, and some guy says, uh, you know, uh, man, I glad I waited. Issue number 3 is the most beautiful piece of work I've ever seen in comic book form. Roy, you and Barry must have done the first 3 pages in unison. Blah 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 blah. The beauty of the horsewomen and their horses, the gray god standing against the sky, open, infinite, etc., etc., etc. And it says uh, it produced a scene equaling and surpassing the siege of Gondor in The Lord of the Rings, formerly my favorite scene in all literature. And I was like, Siege of Gondor? Lord of the Rings? What? What's that? What is he talking about? That sounds interesting, and so, I went from there to a local, store where you could buy newspapers and candy, and they'd have like one of those spinning racks, which would have mass market paperbacks on it. And I found this, and I mean, to show you how old it is, like there's the cover, there's the rest of the book. The back cover is not attached anymore either. I rarely even touch these because they're so frail. And I read this, and I absolutely loved it. And finishing it, I went out and I got this, and I read it in a couple of days, and I absolutely loved it. And I got to the last line: Frodo was alive, but taken by the enemy. And I was like, what? I can't, and I remember it was like late afternoon. It was like June or July. And I got on my bike and raced back to that store to see if they had this, which in fact they did. It hadn't been gnawed on by a mouse in those days, but it was, and so it was, and there I was, and I read those 3 books, and I absolutely loved them, and I loved it so much that, like, as soon as I finished, I started again, and that started me off on a kind of basically just a career of reading the Lord of the Rings 2 or 3 times a year, probably for the next decade, and boring lots of girlfriends telling them about elves and ents and stuff like that. And they'd be going, oh, and so some of this I only found out later. But anyway, the that I was boring them. But I can see why it would be boring now. Anyway, and so I did that, and then there was a period from, I guess, right, not long after I got out of college, until in my mid 30s or something, where I stopped reading it for various reasons, and kind of a very dark time in my life, and it got to the point where it was so long since I'd read them that I was afraid of, what if I go back and read? I mean, I wanted to. I still thought about them. I wanted to read them, but I was afraid that, what if I go back and I read them and I don't think they're good anymore? It will ruin everything, and because I had that experience with another book that I'd read a whole lot when I was in high school, and went back and read it in my early 30s, and I was like, wow, this sucks, and I didn't want that to happen with Tolkien, but then finally I started hearing, talk about the movies that were being made. And I was like, okay, well, I know I'm going to go see the movies, so I don't think I'm going to be disappointed in reading Tolkien. So I'm gonna take the risk. And I went back and I picked it up, and read it again, and still loved it. Continued reading it, and then went to see the movies, and wanted to leap out of my seat when I got that's not Faramir, and various several other moments like that, like in some ways the scene that most offended me in all of the Lord of the Rings films, you know, was the scene, the completely made up scene, which I actually kind of liked the scene. Boromir's wandering around Rivendell, and he comes on, and he comes to the place where you've got the mural of Elendil and Gil-galad fighting Sauron, like like Elrond would put a mural of Sauron up on the wall, right? You know, and so and then there it lies, the sword that was broken, right? The shards of Narsil, and he looks down and he's like, oh, the shards of Narsil, and he's like, whoa. It's like, the Holy Grail. Oh, and then he looks over and Aragorn's sitting there, like reading, watching him, going, "What's up, dude?" And Boromir picks it up, and then decides whatever he says, and like just throws it down. And it was like, no, Boromir would never have done that. He would never have done that. That was like sacrilege,
I've never even thought about that before, but you're so right. Like here's this ancient artifact with so much history and reverence and power, and in the movie he just drops it and leaves it.
That's just a sword. No, it's not just a sword. And that was, in a way, that part really offended me. I mean, I could care less if the Balrog has wings. I don't think he does, but Alan and Sean actually, talking about the Prancing Pony podcast once, said someone should write a 5,000-word essay on whether Balrogs have wings or not. And I wrote a 5,000-word essay in which every word was no. It was like one footnote, and in the footnote it said no. But it's like, it's a movie, and the movies were well made, and I'm not knocking any of the actors. I mean, obviously, Andy Serkis was amazing as Gollum. Viggo Mortensen, who I had never heard of before, he did a really great job with the Aragorn they gave him. Though, Sean Bean was terrific as Boromir. Though when I first heard it announced that he was going to be in it, I was certain he was going to be Aragorn, because I was like, oh, he'll be a great Aragorn, and I think he would have, but there were just so many great performances in there, and great scenes and stuff like that. Yeah, there were things that, I was like, what? Like the whole, in some ways, I think one of the things they got most wrong, and I really don't want to, is that Frodo doesn't trust Gollum ever.
Right.
And in the movie, he's completely fooled by him. And Frodo says several things along the way to Sam. Oh, the promise will hold for a while yet. It's like, which he says these things, which to Sam, of course, which make clear that he knows Gollum is going to betray him. He knows that's going to happen. He doesn't know when. He's hoping he can push it off. He's hoping he's wrong, but he's certainly not fooled, completely fooled as he is in the movie. And that, I think, was probably a thing that was very I don't know why they did it. I don't know whether they I don't know. I'm not going to speculate, but there were other things in there which I thought were very, very good, and very well done. And so I saw the movies, and then I kept on reading the books, and then I guess about, I don't know, 14, 15 years ago, I just decided, well, I wonder if there's like anything on the internet about this. And so I just started searching, and and I started finding, like, I found, the Tolkien Professor, and then, a couple of years later, the Prancing Pony podcast came along, and then, everything just blossomed, after that, and just now it's like there are so many Tolkien podcasts I run across that I've never even heard of before.
Yeah.
I was like, I'll run across one and I'll go, is that new? And then I'll say it's got 98 episodes. So I'm like, okay, so it's not new. And I'm like, how have I not seen this? But it's it's a great world right now if you like Tolkien and you're not a tech pro, so
No, it's real. It's so real.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I love, that's kind of cool that you, first of all, that Conan, and, for people who are just listening and not watching, um, Tom pulled up his like OG Conan the Barbarian comic from 1971 and showed the actual page where the letter to the editor was. That was like your introduction to it, and then later on the movies were sort of your bridge back to Tolkien. And then of
yeah, in a
course,
way, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's kind of it's cool. I love that. I loved hearing that about your story. And um someone just sent me a thing about basically without Tolkien we wouldn't even have, Jack Kirby, or any of those other sort of Marvel legends, which is cool.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, definitely an awesome time to be a Tolkien fan scholar in that universe. Um, I'm trying not to I think it makes sense specific, like you not liking that scene, or at least how they characterize Frodo with Gollum. That's
Hmm.
probably my least favorite scene in the whole trilogy of the movies as well, especially
Hmm.
when Frodo sends Sam home. I just think
Yeah,
it makes no
that
sense.
was
It makes no
that.
sense.
Yeah, and I was like, I really almost got up and left the theater at that point because, like, no, absolutely no, that would never have happened,
Yeah.
and I think one of they really leaned into the men are weak, thing, and in consequence, it was like you have all these things where where you have the Faramir they came up with, and the and also like Elrond sneaking out the back door, like, okay, well, okay, they're gone. Let's head for the havens. Like, no, Elrond is not running out. It's not like, uh, it's like, no, 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 no. You're like, he's been at this for 7,000 years. He's not just going to walk away now. It's like, enough of this. I'm leaving. Go see my wife in Valinor, and have to try. And if I go now, I can bring Arwen, and then I won't have to explain where she is to my wife when I get there. It's like, you let her do what?
You left her there without any notice.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
man.
and then, like, of course you got this is why Elros, Eladin and Elrohir don't go with Elrond, because, like, they don't want to see the scene on the dock and Tall Arisea when Elrond gets there, and Celebrian is waiting for him, and she's gone, Arwen, where's Arwen, dear? Yeah, Aladdin and Elrohir are like, oh, no, 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 don't want to know, Dad. You're on your own with this one. So, yeah, it's like there's sometimes like that. You think of things, you think things through like that, and you can come up with like really funny scenarios. Like, how do you explain that?
Yes, dude.
I'm never going to see my daughter again. So thanks, Elrond. It's like,
Thanks, Elrond.
like yeah,
you,
exactly. It's
you
like,
know, and think about, because you really do a lot of character studies in your current book.
Hmm.
pity, power, and Tolkien's ring,
Hmm.
and it's particularly you spend a lot of time with Frodo. It almost feels like you're sort of journeying with Frodo and Sam and Gollum,
Hmm.
which I think you do intentionally, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that part, and I think obviously careful readers of Tolkien will see these things and come up with their own scenarios and have problems with adaptations and things like
Hmm.
that. But I think that, you know, when you get into scholarship and look at concepts like pity and power and even looking in your book, a lot of these things start to just become obvious.
Hmm.
Things that you were writing as I was reading, I was like, oh yeah, like obviously, Frodo knew that Gollum was going to betray him, right?
Hmm.
And I think that a lot of people miss that, and probably a part of it is because the films
Hmm.
sort of get blended with the books. But um, you know, your book Pity, Power, and Tolkien's Ring, has won a few awards. No big deal. But
It's been nominated. It hasn't won anything yet.
nominated.
So
Okay.
just and I'm grateful that it's been nominated. If it's won anything, they didn't tell me, but yeah, it was nominated for for the Tolkien Society Award. But go figure, they gave the award to the new edition of Tolkien's Letters. Well, I mean, I saw that, I was like, okay, and all I can say about that is this means that no living man can hinder me.
It's true. The only person taking on Tom is the spirit of Tolkien himself,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is, I think,
But
it's
yeah,
pretty.
no, which I mean as a joke. I mean it's like there are there are lots of good things that have been written. But like basically, because I think Alan and Sean's book was up that year too, and we
Oh,
both
okay.
all said once they announced the letters were coming out, everybody else who had a book was like, okay, well that's that. you know we're not we don't have a chance. And and I am very grateful. I mean, to have been nominated in such great company. And the same thing with the Mythopoeic Society. This year, my book has been nominated, and in just in a really excellent company. I mean, Michael Drout's book, Verlin Flieger's in there, Giuseppe Pizzini is in there, and Hamish Williams is in there, and there's one other thing in there which I can't remember off the top of your head. And whoever it is, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering your book, but it's just uh, lots of good stuff, lots of good stuff. And it's an honor just to be in that company. It's just I'm glad for where my name is in the alphabet because I'm right next to Verlin. you know
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. I remember the first time I got something published in Malorn, and it was one year that Tom Shippey was also in just the table of contents. And just to be my name, just be printed near Tom Shippey's, I was like,
Yes,
just
yes.
giddy.
Yeah, it's a very cool
So,
experience. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
it's very cool. But sorry to interrupt you, but you were you were saying before I interrupted you about the receiving awards. Let's not
No,
jinx
no,
that.
I'm glad you corrected me. But I'm glad, for those, because this book, I love connecting people to Tolkien scholarship in general and resources. And so if, readers will talk about it more, but I think that, or listeners rather, I think that if you hear these names that Tom's with, and Tom is doing the classic Tolkien fan, Tolkien scholar thing, and just, waxing humility, which he is. He's a great guy from what I know. But Tom has put out a fantastic piece of scholarship through this book, and it would definitely be worth your time to get and to read, because of how just insightful it is on the concept of pity and power and beyond that. And you can check the blurbs in the book, on the back of the book to see who endorses it, because I don't think there's when Verlin Flieger says that your book is good, it's got to be good. But, for people who are not familiar with the concept of pity and power in the Tolkienian sense, maybe, or even if they're just familiar with the classic line that Gandalf says, right, to Frodo in the book and the film version of The Fellowship of the Ring. Like, why is pity such an important concept to understand when reading Tolkien? And then why did you decide to write a monograph about it?
Well, the first, let me say that the when Tolkien uses the word pity, uh, he's using it in an older sense than is common today. A lot of the time nowadays, when people use the word pity, it's like shoulder to shoulder with contempt. It's like this because you're looking down at the person. And not everybody uses it that way, but it's very commonly, if you see people talk about it, or hear people talk about it, they'll often throw that in, that it's looking down at someone, and that's not how Tolkien uses it at all. I mean, he uses an older sense of the word, and the sense he uses it in. Okay, just to go back to something I said because when I was writing the book, the editors at Kent State University Press said, "Hey, how about you put something in your introduction that talks about what Tolkien means by pity?" Because I knew what Tolkien meant by pity, and that's often the problem of what you mean when you write something, but not everybody else is going to understand what you mean. It's just like, why they should never let software engineers write manuals for how their product works, because it makes sense to them and they show it to other software engineers, and the software, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But to the people who are not software engineers, it's just like, I'm supposed to do what? There was a point in my life where I was kind of doing a little bit of technical writing to explain to people who had grown up, um, you know, with radio and TV, but not computers. And like, so when they were first having e-readers were becoming popular, like almost 20 years ago now. And so you'd have all these people in their 60s, their 70s, and their 80s. And, when you'd say to them, okay, you need to do this, they wouldn't know what you meant. It's just and I would have to write the instructions. It was like, okay, well, if you want to transfer the books from your library to your Kindle or to your Nook or whatever, you have to kind of right click on the cover and then drag it and drop it into the Kindle or into the Nook. And they didn't know what right click meant. They didn't know what drag and drop meant. So I had to explain, okay, your mouse has two buttons, a left side button, a right side. You put it over this, push that down, and then put in a picture of what they'll see then, and this is what you should see. And then drag it, literally just drag it across the screen to where the thing is and let go. And that's dragging and dropping. And you had to really, because those people weren't familiar with that kind of terminology. And so, considering how we often use pity nowadays, it's kind of like the word condescension. Condescension used to be good. Back in Jane Austen's day, someone who was condescending was like a nobleman who acted like a regular guy and who didn't talk down to you. And that was a good thing. Why? He's so condescending. And that was like in Jane Austen. That's a good thing, But in the last, 100 years or so, it's changed to where where it means talking down to someone, or something like that. But pity, in the sense that Tolkien uses it, could be defined. I pulled a quote out of Saint Augustine and out of Aquinas, where it in Latin, the word misericordia. Okay, if you look that word up in a Latin dictionary, it will say, it will define it both as pity and as mercy.
Hmm.
And the word literally means that you are, misery. It's like misery, right? Your misere, you're wretched when in your heart core when you see the situation that someone else is in. Okay, so you feel this pain for their suffering, and you try to do something about it. Not just you go, oh yeah, poor guy, and then but like I got a plane to catch. It's like no, it's like you try to do something, and and so that word misericordia, pity and mercy are like two different sides of the same coin, because the action has to follow the attempt to so when Gandalf talks about pity and mercy, he's really talking about, in a sense, the same thing. Just one something that goes on in here, and one the manifestation, the outward manifestation of that. It's not mercy in the sense of getting pardoned in a court of law, or something like that. It's not that kind of mercy, that kind of legal thing. Um, and so that's the kind of that when Tolkien talks about pity, that's what he's talking about, and that's what and Gandalf is trying to get Frodo to feel that for Gollum. He's never seen Gollum, of course, at this point. And all he knows is especially since Frodo knows the real story of what happened with Gollum and Bilbo, and he knows that it wasn't just, oh well, if if you win, I'll give you a prize. It's just like and all, it was like, no, if you lose, I'm going to eat you, and if you win, I'm going to eat you. So basically, so and he knows that Gollum and so Frodo knows that the Gollum story that was in the first edition of The Hobbit is a lie, and so he's heard all these things about Gollum, and so he knows the deal, and so it's no surprise that he thinks Gollum is loathsome and horrible, because Gollum is loathsome and horrible. It's not like Bilbo wasn't. If anything, Bilbo made Gollum look better than he probably was. Bilbo didn't mention anything about crawling through windows to snatch babies out of cradles. That was Gandalf who told us that. So and one of the when Gandalf talks about the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many. You have to remember the scene in The Hobbit where Bilbo comes up behind Gollum in the tunnel. Gollum doesn't know he's there. Bilbo has the opportunity to kill him. Bilbo wants to kill him. Like literally says, and all of a sudden he gets this intuition, this feeling, this understanding of how absolutely wretched Gollum's life is, and how awful Gollum's life is. And that moves him to feel pity and to show mercy. And because, what do you think happens if Bilbo kills him? The ring being what it is. Bilbo is now the new Gollum, because he will have killed Gollum just like Gollum killed, Dagel, and so, and Gandalf says that was one of the things, that's probably the thing that saved Bilbo and kept him, safe from the ring, for so long, was because he began his possession of the ring by showing mercy and feeling pity. And Gandalf is trying to get Frodo to feel the same way, because he feels that Gandalf knows that, oh, what are the odds that you just put your hand on the floor in a cave and, oh, look, how nice, a gold ring. And and Gandalf knows how these things work. And so he's trying to get Frodo to believe this. Uh, at this, trying to get Frodo to believe that not only not only does should we feel sorry for, should we feel pity for Gollum, and not only should we show him mercy, but he's a hobbit too.
Mm.
And and Frodo's like, no, 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 he couldn't possibly be a hobbit. And that's really where Frodo kind of gets unhinged about the whole thing is when they're trying to make him think he's a hobbit. See, this could have happened to Bilbo. This could happen to you. And Frodo is not prepared to understand that yet. And even when he backs down from what from arguing with Gandalf, and it's not the most, he's like, okay, well, I'm still afraid of him, and it's like it's not the most gracious. He's not persuaded really. He's just giving in because he knows Gandalf is right, but he still doesn't want to accept that Gandalf is right. But and so he still doesn't, he's still too afraid and too innocent, I suppose you could say, to feel to genuinely feel the pity, especially since he hasn't seen him. So that's where that's where the pity comes in. And I first really kind of started thinking about this when I was reading one day and talking to somebody about the scene on the stairs where Gollum nearly repents. And it's just like, and I'm like, in this scene, like here we are, we're in a scene that no one in the scene could have seen. Right? It's just like there's no way. I mean, Frodo and Sam are asleep, and the only person who knows what happens here is Gollum, right? And so, and all of a sudden, because we know Gollum is up to something, right? We know he's maybe she'll help. We know he's up to something. We know not to trust him. And he comes back, and and there's this moment where he almost repents of what he's about to do, and all of us, and Sam wakes up and quite reasonably accuses Gollum of being up to no good, and of course Sam is right. Gollum is up to no good. Maybe not in that individual gesture when he reached out to touch Frodo's knee, but the last time he saw Gollum reaching out to Frodo was back when they were back in the just at the end of leaving the Dead Marshes, where he overhears Gollum's conversation with himself, and it says every time the Gollum voice talked, his hands reached for Frodo's throat, and every time the Smeagol's voice talked, the hands came back. And so now here he is. He wakes up and he's seeing, Gollum reaching out for Frodo, and not trusting him to start with, and being startled out of sleep, he overreacts, and he quickly realizes he's overreacted, because he actually apologizes, and which is often overlooked, so that's it. All of a sudden, we are feeling sorry for Gollum, and we're annoyed with Sam. Sam, because we know Gollum means no harm in this moment. Excuse me. Or at least we know it looks like he means no harm, and Sam is wrong, and everybody loves Sam. And then to see, and Sam has just screwed up, and it's just like, and you're like, oh, Sam, And so it was like I was thinking, how do we get from, because Tolkien has spent the entire book up till now telling us how evil Gollum is, how bad Gollum is, how foul and vile and untrustworthy Gollum is. He eats babies. I mean, it's like how much he wants to eat hobbits, and stuff like that. And that was part of, remember, that was part of the thing. Gollum says, "Oh, I win the contest, I'm going to eat you." Right.
Right.
And so of course Sam's thinking that. But now all of a sudden, after all of this, there's this moment where suddenly we're in the position that Bilbo was in back in Riddles in the Dark, when he suddenly sees how wretched Gollum's whole existence is, and feels pity for him. And that kind of set me off on a search for just a really kind of detailed search on like how Gollum is portrayed, like what's said about him, when he appears or when people just talk about him, and like a lot. It's funny, a lot of the things that you say, like, well, I'd read this and I go, oh yeah, right. And it was like some of those things I just realized like the second before I put them down, where it was like, the realization that things like Gandalf never refers to Gollum as Sméagol, except when he's trying to convince Frodo to feel sorry for him. Every other time it's Gollum. When Gollum is with Frodo and Sam, Frodo will address Gollum as Sméagol, but when he's talking to Sam, he will refer to him as Gollum. And it's just, and it's just these little details that are in there that Tolkien is so great at just sneaking in. And so that's how I started, and that brought me back to the shadow in the past conversation. Which is the thing that, of course, leads to the paradox that, because when Frodo says, no, here, you take the ring, I don't want it. And Gandalf is like, no, don't tempt me. He says that twice. He says, don't tempt me, twice. And he says, because the power that the ring has, I would be tempted to use it because of the desire to do good. And that would be the end of me. Because once you start using the ring, whatever you start using it for, you're on that downhill slope, and short of divine intervention, you're not getting off it. And so Gandalf is wise enough to know that he's that the Bilbo's pity may rule the fate of many, but it won't save him if he takes the ring. Just like so that the pity of Bilbo won't necessarily save Frodo from the ring. I mean, it certainly helps, but Frodo is still standing there, in the Samath Nullor, playing mini Sauron, and saying, I claim the ring is mine, and like in that moment, he kind of is, that very act of saying the ring is mine is a challenge to Sauron.
Yeah.
So, and it's a challenge which if it came down to it, that he's going to lose, Sauron would have shown up and squashed him like a bug. So you end up with a situation where, of course, the least likely person imaginable is the person who, saves everything, so it's, but there's this whole thing, because the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, but the ring was invented to rule the fate of many. That's why Sauron created it. And so you've got these two things, which which are kind of in opposition to each other. And paradoxically, the only thing that can help, that can defend you at all, can only defend you so long. Earthly pity, human pity. It has to. It takes the pity with a capital P that comes from up there that to save you, to actually save Frodo, you know,
Right.
and achieve the quest. So, but yeah, without that, if Sam had, in the scene before that one, when Sam had Gollum at his mercy and he had his sword out, if Sam had killed Gollum, as I think everybody expects him to do, I'll deal with him, Mr. Frodo. And I think everybody, pretty much, probably everybody, or almost everybody, expects him to kill Gollum there, and he doesn't, because Sam is finally, having been a ring bearer himself and having seen what the ring has done to Frodo, and has finally put it all together, and now he finally finds pity for Gollum. If Sam kills him, I don't even want to think of how ugly it gets after that. What happens then? Because Frodo's not throwing the ring in the fire.
Right.
And so it's a very, very ugly situation. And who knows what would have happened there. And so it's Bilbo's pity, then Frodo's pity, then Sam's pity, and all of that somehow manages to evoke a catastrophe, to evoke divine pity, and save the day and the world.
Yeah. I just think, going back to just all that stuff, I'm thinking about Gandalf too, with all the access to the writings we have of Tolkien's.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense how Gandalf is like the dude to understand the nature of pity and how it functions in the Legendarium, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how he's the the student of Nienor, and how Gandalf's insight into pity, and even though he doesn't know exactly what's going to happen, he does a pretty good job of understanding how it functioned for Bilbo, how it's going to function for Frodo and Sam, and even Gollum, right? Tolkien does that thing where he spoils what's going to happen later in the book without spoiling it, very cryptic stuff. But like you said, you talked about the paradoxical nature of it, and this is the stuff that, like, not framed under pity and power, I've thought about. I think a lot of people kind of wrestle with the fact that Frodo fails at the end, right? And it's only because of Gollum's sort of treachery that the quest is successful, and people are like, what do you even do with that, right? And I think that the paradoxical nature is that pity is both the means of salvation as well as what damns Gollum, and even, to a certain extent, Frodo, right? Not to the full point of death and condemnation, but it's there. And so, like, you've given a bunch of examples too leading up to that, like, why is, like, so I guess to maybe explain more how that paradox functions in the text, and then also why is it important to even explore?
Well, Frodo's failure is Frodo fails because anyone would have failed. Everyone would have failed. No one could have succeeded. Not Aragorn, not Gandalf, not Galadriel. The only people who could have conceivably, I mean, through strength, have succeeded would have been like the Valar, because they were more powerful than Sauron to begin with, and so the power that's in the ring is less than the power they have. So, unlike with everybody else, So I mean, Owlay could have destroyed the ring, because his craft was greater than Sauron's, and the Valar wouldn't have been corrupted by it. but the Valar are like, no, 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 your problem, you know, you know, and so, but you know, the thing is, Frodo was always going to fail. I mean, he can't even throw the ring into his fireplace in Bag End, you know, and surely Frodo, he's no dwarf or Noldor and Smith, but he knows his fireplace isn't going to melt gold. You know, even if he doesn't know that, you know, you need something like, I don't know, 2,600 degrees or 2,700 degrees to melt gold. And that was actually one of the things that annoyed me the most about Game of Thrones is in the first book where, what's his name? Daenerys's brother gets killed by them pouring gold over his head. And it's just like, and how do they melt the gold? In the fireplace. Like,
Puts on in a cauldron for 5 minutes.
no, no. You don't melt gold like that. And it's just like, and you got some nerve wondering about Aragorn's economic policy if you don't know that a fire isn't a house, you know, house fire, a hearth isn't going to melt gold. But I digress. But you know, Frodo is never going to succeed because no one could succeed. It's and he is, as time goes by, of course, he is worn down by the burden of resisting it. He's corrupted by the burden of bearing it. He's corrupted by. It's like he gets into this place where, when he finally does meet Gollum, he's confronted with, and he feels pity for him. He's confronted with the dilemma of, okay, now what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this guy? Because this guy's dangerous, you know. And so, if at the first moment Frodo had simply killed Gollum when Gollum was on top of Sam and throttling Sam, nobody could really complain. It was like he was killing him in defense of Sam. No one could say that there was anything wrong with that. You know, not especially not, you know, not in a world like that. But he doesn't. He says, I feel pity for him. But there's, okay, now what are you going to do with him? And he tries to, hey, you know, Gollum, we spared your life. One good turn deserves another. Gollum's like, right, you got it. No problem. I'm with you. And then as soon as they pretend to fall asleep, Gollum takes off. But they don't trust him. So they know he's going to take off. And they try tying up his leg. And that doesn't work. And so it's like they're in this position where they've got to kill him, tie him up and leave him, or take him with them. And Frodo allows Gollum to swear by the ring that he will obey the master of the precious. Frodo has just allowed Gollum to call him the master of the precious. Gandalf would have smacked Frodo in the head for that if he had been there. But it's just like, and that was like, oh, no, master of the precious, you are not. You know, and Frodo, and I know sometimes people don't think Frodo is actually using the ring here. I mean, no, he's not got it on his finger, but he's using the power of the ring. He's using the power the ring has over Gollum. And Tolkien actually, in an outline that he wrote for this scene, or actually long before, that he says that it's like In the Shadow of the Past or something, you know, one of those volumes, that Frodo uses the ring to control Gollum. And so Frodo is using the ring to control Gollum. And that's not good. That is not a good thing. This is something actually a couple weeks earlier Galadriel had warned him against. Don't try to use the ring. It will destroy you. And, you know, so Frodo makes this choice. And it's an interesting choice because back at the beginning of book 3, Aragorn had been faced with a choice to either follow Frodo and Sam or to try and save Merry and Pippin. Aragorn makes, as it turns out, the right choice. And when he meets Gandalf, the white, and he explains to him what had happened. Gandalf says, "Your choice was just, and it has been rewarded." Is Frodo's choice to use the ring to dominate Gollum just? And that's a and so you've got these two things, that kind of balancing each other off in different books. Aragorn makes the right choice and is rewarded. Frodo makes the necessary choice, perhaps you could say, because there was no other way he was going to control Gollum, short of murdering him. And so he, but it's from that point on that Frodo starts fading away after that. He starts seeing, feeling the eye looking at him, which is about him, because the one thing everybody needs to remember that nobody does is that the eye of Sauron sees nothing. We're always talking, the eye is watching for us. No, it's like, it sees. Gollum is always like, it sees us. It's like, if it saw you, you'd all be dead.
Right.
And God, it doesn't see what it's like real branding. It's like the all-seeing eye, but the all-seeing eye doesn't really see. For whatever reason it fails to see, that's another question, but it doesn't, for all the fact that people they know it's looking, they can feel they can. I'm not saying that Frodo doesn't feel that the eye is looking for him, but if the eye had ever actually seen him, game over. Because he can like send to the ring wraiths going, there, here, here's your longitude and your latitude, go get it. And that would have been the end of the story. So, but there's all that talk of it, and so much of it, he sees us. It's in their heads. It's in their heads. It's like Big Brother is watching.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Big Brother is a poster on the wall. And so there's what does Frodo's choice there? What does that mean? But on the other hand, it is somehow the mercy that Frodo showed to Gollum in not killing him. Somehow that counts for more in the end. Because, of course, if anybody knows, that there was no way Frodo was going to be able to throw the ring in, it's Iluvatar.
Hmm.
And if anybody can sort out those kind of difficult things, it's Iluvatar. So I saw someone argued at one point, and I can't remember exactly who it is. I think it might have been a scholar by the name of Amy Ahmed Raduga. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. She said that Gollum falling into the fire is actually the best thing that could have happened to him at that point.
Hmm.
It was because it set him free from the ring. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Because Gollum, he was too far gone, he was never coming back. And I mean, if Frodo was never going to come back from what he suffered with the ring, Gollum certainly wasn't, barring again divine intervention. And and there was none for repairing Frodo. Because there's always a price, for things. But it's just like it's the whole paradox thing. It's just like that. Frodo makes this choice. He chooses to pity Gollum, even though he's still afraid of him. He chooses, again, 5 minutes later, he chooses to use the ring to control Gollum. And luckily for him, in the end, the choice to pity weighs more, counts for more. Between these two choices, the necessary choice that cannot have all by itself a good ending, uh, and like even like outside the Black Gate with Frodo and Gollum outside the Black Gate, Frodo he basically berates Gollum into a groveling, whimpering, kind of pool of Smeagol on the ground, with "You will never get it back." You know, he doesn't, and it's just like, and it's one thing that's really interesting about that is that it wasn't like Smeagol, Gollum had just said that. He had said that sometime earlier, and Frodo had kind of let slide. And then, because when they had figured out what they were going to do and where they were going to go and how they were going to try this other route, then he says, "Oh, by the way, you're never going to get it back. You gave yourself away there. And if it came to it, I would put the ring on and tell you to jump into the fire, and you would do it." Of course, Frodo's wrong. He's not able to control Gollum, because he's wearing the ring in the Sanath Nar, and he can't even control Gollum with the ring at that point because Gollum is at that point completely unhinged. So it's just, but there's no easy answers. There's no it's not like this simple, like you often hear. It's all black and white.
Yeah.
It's not. No, it's
Well,
not.
and it made me think, as I was exploring that, like just as you said, it's not so much pity and power against each other in sort of like a sort of a false dichotomy sort of sense, right? Just as pity and mercy are sort of the two sides of the same coin, pity and power are sort of the two edges of the same sword, right? It's sort of like, and that's maybe, you can disagree with me on that, but I see it as like Frodo has to use power, like the characters in the Fellowship have to use power to accomplish their task, right? Obviously, there's a difference between the dominating power, or I think that in the book you do this sort of comparison between Shelob and Tom Bombadil as sort of these two extremes of like Shelob being the all dominating, all consuming sort of darkness, power type deal, and then Tom Bombadil being the other extreme of like, I don't want to say ambivalence, but the ring it doesn't tempt him, it doesn't bother him, right? And so you get this kind of spectrum in between the two, if you will. And so, like, I guess for like the power side of things, like, and maybe you've already kind of given your thoughts on this in talking about how Frodo used the ring instead of killing Gollum. But like, why is power like the other edge of that sword, and why is it not as black and white as you said, and why is it important, etc.?
Because there is a because there's this whole kind of spectrum of power. Like if Tom Bombadil has power, right? But Tom Bombadil doesn't use his power to just dominate other things for the sake of dominating them. He uses his power on Old Man Willow, but Old Man Willow is trying to kill people. He
Yeah.
uses his power against the Barrow Wight because the Barrow Wight is trying to turn the hobbits into little Barrow Wights. And so, but other than that, he doesn't really have any. He has no interest in dominating anything. On the one hand, and on the other hand, you have on the other end of the spectrum, you've got Shelob, who just wants to consume everything, to dominate everything, not even in a sense of control it, but just literally just devour it, which devour is another word that's often used of what the ring does to people, right? And what
Mm.
Sauron will do if he gets the ring. Gollum says like he'll eat everything, and in between you've got various steps in between, which are more or less, which are more towards the non-domination or more towards the domination. You know, um, you've got Gandalf is, in the conversation they have in Bag End. I mean, Gandalf is deceiving Frodo. He's lying to him, and but and he's and he has, but he has, and in fact, a good reason for it, because he knows if he tells him that this Smeagol person is Gollum, Frodo's going to stop listening. And it's the moment Frodo's like, well, wait a minute, you're talking about Gollum? That's like everything changes at that point. When he suddenly realizes that it's Gollum that Gandalf is talking about, and Gandalf is lying to him, and to try to get him to see something differently he is withholding information, and everything he says is presumably true, but he's deceiving him. He's not giving Frodo all the facts, hoping that some of the facts will be enough to get him where he really needs to be. And in part, a lot of that is to help protect Frodo, because remember he says that Bilbo's pity helped protect Bilbo from the effects of the ring for so long.
Mm.
And he wants the same thing for Frodo. Unfortunately, Frodo finds pity for Bilbo finds pity for Gollum as he's leaving him and never seeing him again. Frodo finds pity for Gollum when he sees him and is now going to be going on a road trip with him. So it's like when they come to feel pity is like at kind of opposite ends, and so the pity certainly it helps, but the power, depending on what you're using the power for. I mean, think of Galad, both Gandalf and Galadriel. They both refuse to take the ring because of what they would end up doing with it, not because of what they would start out doing with it, not because what their motives would be initially. They're wise enough and old enough, and have seen enough that they know that, like when Sam says to Galadriel, if you had the ring, you'd set things straight in the Shire, and she says, yeah, that's how it would start.
Mm.
you know, and I think it was Tolkien said that if Gandalf had taken the ring, he would have ended up worse than Sauron, because, and he would have made goodness seem hateful, because it would have been all self-righteousness. It would have been all, oh, I know what's good for you, and I'm going to make you do it, whether you like it or not. And they knew enough about themselves to know that they could not go there, because it would end badly. So whatever, excuse me, whatever they started out trying to use the power for would turn into something else, because the power of the ring is just, it's too great that you sit there and you say to yourself, well, just think of all the things I could do with this power. Well, not everybody's going to want to go along with that. Everybody, with the exception perhaps of Gollum, everybody who, I mean, Boromir has got excellent reason for wanting the ring. He wants to defend Gondor. He wants to protect, his homeland. You know, Galadriel wants to protect her homeland. Gandalf wants to help people. So it's like the temptations that arise from within us, uh, when we're in this position where the ring is within reach. Very often take the form. I mean, Frodo wants to save the Shire. Sam wants to defeat, defeat Sauron, and with a wave of his hand make the Vale of Gorgoroth bloom. All of those things that go through their heads are, taken by themselves. They're all good reasons. They're all good uses for power. The problem is that's where it's going to start, and it's not going to end there. Because it's as far as somebody like Frodo or Boromir, it's pretty darn close to absolute power. It's as close to absolute power as makes no difference,
Oh
for a
man.
creature within the world. So
We first the thing that made me think of this, especially hearing you talk about Gandalf sort of not giving Frodo all the information, and it kind of reminds me of the prophet Nathan going to David after he had killed Uriah, after he had slept with Bathsheba, and I almost see like a sort of parallel there, and I don't like. And it just made me think of like how originally this idea of like kingship and power was good for the ancient Israelites. And then all of a sudden David's like, hey, this power is pretty cool. I can go and dominate and manipulate people, right? And then it's the downfall of the kingdom of Israel, pretty much the rest of the Old Testament. And so I'm thinking of like where the parallels there, as you said, is that with Galadriel and Gandalf realizing that at first it would be good, and then it would eventually snowball into those horrible things. And you see it reflected in Frodo's personal experience, and using that power, right, and how it corrupts him later on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's just not just that. I mean, there's two times in Mordor where he kind of loses it with Sam. When Sam says is going to give him back. At first he says, "Oh no, Mr. Frodo, I've got the ring," and he's like, "Wow, that's great!" And then all of a sudden it's like, "Give it to me," he is like, he's like crazed, and he says he does some nasty things, and then there's a point where he reaches for his sword, and it's like, okay, like we've it's like, think of the scene with Gandalf and Bilbo arguing in the first chapter, right? Bilbo says, "You want the ring for yourself, and you can't have it," and he backs up against the wall and he puts his hand on his sword. That's a threat.
Yeah.
Somebody puts up their hand on a weapon, in the middle of an argument. That's a threat. And then you go from so you have that, and then you have in Rivendell when Frodo gets to Rivendell and Bilbo says, "Oh, I just love to see the ring, just for a second." And Frodo's like, "Okay." And Frodo starts to pull it out, and Bilbo reaches for it. And unlike in the movie where Bilbo seems to turn into some kind of ghoulish-looking creature, it's clear in the book that it's all in Frodo's head.
Yeah.
And he sees something that sounds like Gollum in his head, and he wants to hit him. He wants to strike him. Bilbo, his uncle, whom he loves, whom hasn't seen in 17 years, and he just saw him for the first time like 5 minutes ago, and now he wants to hit him. And Bilbo sees something in Frodo's face. It never says what he sees. He sees something in Frodo's face that makes him go, "I understand. I'm sorry. and he backs away, and then you get that same moment again. With you get the same thing where Frodo wants to hit Sam. You know, and it's like it's just the same. You keep coming back to these moments, just like you come back to the moments of like the moment where of the moment of Bilbo's pity gets, in a sense, gets repeated in a sense over and over again. Where a choice is made, uh, which is crucial. Like when Gandalf says that the closest call in getting to Rivendell was the moment in the Barrow Wights Barrow, because Frodo was going to run out on his friends and
Hmm.
let them die and save himself. And he'd already made up a lie. What could I have done, Gandalf? But I saved the ring. And that would have been the doom of Frodo right there. That would have been the
Hmm.
end of Frodo right there if he had made that choice. Because the absolute, positively worst thing you can do in Tolkien is run out on your friends. If
Hmm.
you've got a choice between saving your friends, standing up for your friends, standing by your friends, or running away to do something else, always choose your friends. And this all the way back, even in the very beginning, in the Book of Lost Tales, when uh, Turin comes face to face with the dragon, and you know Finduilas is being led as a prisoner off by the orcs, and the dragon says, "I'll give you a choice. You could go try and save her if you want, or you could go back home where your mother and sister are enslaved and suffering and this and that. But you can't do both." And Turin, despite the fact that he has just seen Finduilas being led away, whereas he hasn't seen his mother in 20 years, uh, he chooses to go back to Dorloman and try and save his mother and sister. And of course, that's all a lie because they're no longer even there. But the narrator of the story condemns Turin very fiercely for this, for 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 forsaking his friends in a danger that he could see.
Hmm.
And so it's like that's just like the Pippin. That's like just like Aragorn and Merry and Pippin, right? Except Aragorn makes the right choice. Turin makes the wrong choice. And the narrator of the Turin story in the Book of Lost Tales says this choice was the thing that brought all the misery that came afterwards. Forsaking her, because it would have been, because if he saved her, maybe they could have found happiness. If even he, it would have even been better had he died trying to save her. But by forsaking her, he, he doomed everything. That was the bad choice. And so this whole like never run out on your friends. It's like the worst choice you can make in Tolkien. So
Yeah, man, I love this connection to Turin, and I know you've done a scholarship on Turin as well. And listeners, you can find Tom's articles online and some of his talks as well. Just Google Tom Hillman Turin, or Tom Hillman Tolkien. Uh, and I got to hear one of the more recent things that you did at Westmoot last year, which was just awesome. But I'm thinking about just that value of not walking out on your friends, and of course, in the Book of Lost Tales, that being sort of the straw that continues to break the camel's back is, in the book, with an important as such an important concept as pity, and then of course as power as well, and you're exploring a piece of text, like going and exploring and analyzing the author's life is kind of a thing that is necessary, right? Through
Mhm.
doing scholarship. And so you do this in the book, you explore, Tolkien's war experience, right? And you also include like, hey, Tolkien didn't just experience a war himself, like his child went to war. His children
Mhm.
went to war. You talk about his religious experience and potentially some of his beliefs as well, and then of course his experience with Edith and things of that nature. So like in those explorations, like why do you think that bringing Tolkien's life experience into that was important for analyzing pity and power in that way? And and even if you have something there to relate to the friend aspect too.
Well, Tolkien had, the First World War was just absolutely, catastrophic. We tend to think, as far as Tolkien is concerned, we tend to sort of think when Tolkien says, "Oh, but one of my friends was dead," when he says that by 1918, "Oh, but one of my friends was dead," we tend to think of that just in terms of the TCBS, right? The other three guys, Smith was dead. Gilson was dead. The only one who wasn't dead was Wiseman. But it's so much more than just those four guys.
Mm,
Tolkien's college had the highest. Tolkien's college at Oxford had like the highest percentage of casualties, people killed in the war, and so of the people who started with him in 1911 at Oxford, something like, I don't remember, it was like something like 38% of them or something like that, you know, died in the war, you know,
mm,
and plus, and that's not, and it's plus he would have known people in the other colleges too, and Oxford, because in those days, the people who went to Oxford in those days, and just like even here, it was like poor people didn't go to school, didn't go to college,
mm,
anywhere, in 1911. You took, if you were going to college, you had some wealth, whether it was wealth from land or wealth from business, or your family had some sort of wealth. Tolkien was kind of like, because he managed to get a scholarship, kind of squeaked in, you know. But one of the things that the people, especially in Oxford and in Cambridge as well, that class of people, their status was, in a way, they they knew they had a certain status, and the way their class had, in essence, earned its status was by leadership in war. And it's like all, so many of those Oxford undergraduates went off. They didn't become, not too many of them became privates. They went and became officers, and those officers, those like lieutenants, they were the first ones out of the trench. When they were, during the battle. That's how his friend Gilson got killed on the first day of the Somme. Um, but the number of people that Tolkien would have known who died in that war, people he went to St. Edward's with, people he went, to, who were in his college, people who were he knew from other colleges in Oxford. Just the number of people that he would have known who didn't make it, um, way more than just the, two of, all but one of my best friends. That all but one of my friends is a much bigger circle than the TCBS. Those were his best friends, and he's probably thinking of them more than anybody else. But when you read things, diaries and other things about what Oxford was like during the war or after the war, it was like a ghost town, because there was like during the war there were so few people there because they had all gone off to the war, and then after and never came back. You know, so that had to have. I mean, even aside from what he probably saw when he was on the battlefield, that has to have a terrible a terrible effect. Something that really makes you question everything. The whole the whole how can God allow this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah. How can God be loving and just and merciful and allow this? And a lot of I think what you get in all of Tolkien's work from beginning to end, especially in the Legendarium stuff, is he is wrestling with these questions of how how can this be? How can and not that he I think ever really comes up with an answer, because I think the only answer I think he probably comes up with is it's important that you have to ask the question. That asking the question is more important than answering the question, because if there is an answer to the question, it's not something we're going to be able to understand. You know, as long as we see through a glass darkly. You know, and so much of the legendarium stuff, the Silmarillion stuff, is dealing with fate and free will and death and immortality and divine justice and evil and all of that, and how he felt about those things, and how it's got to like completely overwhelm you, to be faced with something that horrific, that that pervasive. I mean, England as a whole suffered terribly in that war, as far as the number of people they lost, uh, and especially since in those days it was even worse, because in those days the army was divided up territorially, and so you could have, if you joined the army, you stood probably a really good chance of ending up in a unit with all the other guys from where you came from. So it wasn't like you were there with I'm there. I'm from New York. You're there. You're from Tennessee. Somebody else from California. No, it's like you're there with 30 other guys from Nashville.
Yeah.
I'm there with 30 other guys from the Bronx, guys I knew, guys whose sisters I dated, and stuff like that. And then so places could have the effect on single places could be huge if if a specific company or regiment or whatever had took really heavy casualties, as they so often did. It's one of the reasons it's not like that anymore. They stopped doing it that way because it could basically for almost like wipe out the entire youth of a small town, and so they reorganized things, and so did we, but it's just the impact of all of that is is something I can't conceive, because thank God I've never gone through it, it's my brother was in Vietnam, and back, as I'm sure the Vietnam veterans were not, welcomed home with open arms. You know, whatever happened over there, whatever they did over there, uh, you know, uh, they were not treated very well. And So you didn't have parades, things like that, and in the 80s, things started to change. You started to get like movies about Vietnam. You got like a Platoon, right? And people started to have reunions, of your unit and this and that and everything. And I asked my brother, because he generally never talked about it. Um, and I asked him, I said, did you ever go to one of those reunions? And he said, no, don't want to. And I said, why not? You know, and he said to me, he said, I love those guys like they're my brothers, but I never want to see them again,
Mm.
because seeing them again would be something that brought it all back. Now, if he were still alive now, I don't know how he'd feel about it now. That might have changed. But at that point, it was just too open a wound. And that was 20 years after he came back, you know. So, and that was just one of the, and it was like his voice was breaking when he said that. He
Yeah.
didn't cry or anything, but it was like his voice was like choking up in his throat when he said that. And so, the idea that you could, yeah, how do you process that? Well, and as Tolkien said, well, I started writing about elves, you know, and it wasn't so much, it wasn't to escape it, it was to try and there's a letter from April 1944 in which he talks about this to Christopher, and he says, you know, I had all these feelings that I had to try and make sense of, because of the war, and that led me to start writing these stories. So the stories are, in a sense, all about trying to deal with that feeling of, of oh God, what have I just been through? What has just happened? How can human beings do this to each other? If there is a God, how can God allow us to do this to each other? You know, and he spent the rest of his life in many ways asking those questions, working those questions through. That's why he kept writing Turin over and over and over again, because Turin, is such a dark story. It's such a dark story. You compare it to like the fall of Gondolin, and the fall of Gondolin. There's plenty of dark stuff in there, but it's all very heroic and this and that. Whereas to Turin, everything goes wrong, no matter what he does. He always makes the wrong choice. Or he makes the wrong choice. He overreacts to something. He loses his temper, and no matter what he does, it all just it all just turns to dust. You know, but if he hadn't forsaken Finduilas, maybe it would have been different. But and that's the thing, and that story that's why it's it's at the center of the legendarium. It's when you look at in the beginning, in the Book of Lost Tales, the tale of Tenuviel is not what it is later. It's kind of like this kind of little fairy story with talking cats and talking dogs, and and stuff like that, and Tenuviel, they decide to go back to get the Silmaril because she wants to go home, and she knows she can't go home without the Silmaril. So and so it's an entirely, it's this kind of like real, like very, very fairy story thing. The Silmarils are just pretty jewels, they're not, they don't have the fate of Arda locked up in them yet. That develops later, and that's one of the things that helps make the story of Beren and Luthien much more serious. And also in the Book of Lost Tales and the Tale of Tenuviel, Beren is also an elf. So that changes the whole death thing, you know. And so but Turin, the Turin story has there's an amazing amount of continuity. I mean, emphases change, things change, characters change, names change. Turin changes his name every other paragraph. Eventually, he doesn't change his name that much in the beginning, which is interesting. But there's just all this wrestling with these horrors, in it, of like, how could you not feel like you were cursed if, on when you're hiding in a trench on the Somme, getting bitten by lice and rats and all sorts of other revolting things while bombs are falling on you, and you're soaking wet for days, and all that lovely stuff, and then the stink of bodies, that in no man's land, and or even worse, the people out in no man's land who aren't dead yet, who are crying out for someone to come help them, and it's just like, what a horror show, you know. If it's just an absolute horror show, and here's Tolkien. He's trying to make sense of how he feels about all of it, um, and spends a lifetime doing it. So,
Yeah.
because when he writes that line about in the introduction to the second edition, when he writes that line about, by 1918, all but one of my friends were dead. That's 15 years later, and you can tell that still burns, 50 years after it happened. And so it's a lot of people who were in that war drank themselves to death, shot themselves, killed themselves in other ways afterwards, for years afterwards. There's a point in C.S. Lewis's diary where he's talking about this guy who'd been in the army too during the war, and the guy, the war just basically just destroyed him mentally and emotionally. And Lewis, tries to talk to him, tries to help him, like, because he was there too, of course, and the guy eventually, dies, and like in, I don't know, 24, 25, something like that. And Lewis says to someone, like, do you remember when we thought that all we needed to deal with this was like art and music and books, and it's just really, and it's just like, yeah. And so how do you process that? Some people don't, some people are processed by it, you know, but, Tolkien had a hard time of it. And, when just think of this, when he gives up on the Book of Lost Tales and he decides he's going to turn to something new and he's going to write these verse stories, right? He doesn't turn to Beren and Luthien. The first thing he turns to is Turin, and spends 5 or 6 years working on that before he turns to that, and I think it tells us something, that he turned to the dark story. It tells us that tells us how much power, how long a shadow what he'd experienced, cast over him at that time. He seems to like start coming out of it in the mid-20s, because he, and I think it's a number of things. I think it's like Christopher was born, and there's all these things like happen in within a year. Christopher is born. Gawain and the Green Knight comes out. Tolkien gets the chair in Oxford. The next year, Tolkien meets C.S. Lewis. And there's like a change. I think that goes on as he has like a really good year and a half, and he starts to kind of come out of it. Not that he ever gets fully out of it. Not that he doesn't sometimes go back into it. But I think that's one of the reasons why he switches to Baron and Luthien is it's a much more cheerful story than anything about Turin. Um, so anyway,
No, I love it, man. I appreciate you sharing the story about your brother too, and connecting that. Just because scholars like John Garth and Janet Croft, and then of course people who have kind of continued that historical work with Tolkien and his war experience, um, is just so key to just not understanding thematic elements in the book, but like you said, just the existential like wrestling that obviously the intensity that soldiers and veterans do, right? But also
mm-hmm.
that we all have to wrestle with, whether it's the inevitability of death,
Mm-hmm.
power, all that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so I think that the answer of like there isn't really an answer, but and even Tolkien was wrestling with it throughout his entire writing, and even retconning everything that he had written before constantly. Um, I think is just one of those things that I find both sad, intriguing, um, and as well as like just kind of inspires me to go and read more Tolkien, and kind of and go after that stuff. But I feel like we've brought it to like, and you bring this up really that like pity and power aren't just abstract concepts, right? They're things that are practical, and the characters in Lord of the Rings have to do something with it, right? It's not pity doesn't mean anything when there's no action behind it. Um,
Right.
and you connected that to the real world. But I guess kind of just for closing here, Tom, like for those of us who actively engage Tolkien and his works as a place of escape, wrestling, enjoyment, as well as just a source of guidance. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that adopting Tolkien's views, if there are any hard views, or at least maybe his approach to pity and power, is it like beneficial, do you think? And if not, or I guess if so, yeah, like why is wrestling with it so key to not only understand Tolkien, but also we as people, like on a daily basis, I guess.
Well, we hear a lot in the last few years that the closest thing I suppose that we have now uh, to what Tolkien means by pity is like empathy, and there are a lot of people out there who seem to think, oh, empathy is bad, and it's just like empathy is bad. What? And it's like feeling sorry for people who are suffering, trying to help people who are suffering. That's bad, and it's like there's and so I think what you see in Tolkien, when you see that, like just for example, when they're on their way home and they find Saruman alongside the road, and they try to show him mercy. They try to show him pity and kindness. He rejects it, and and then when they get to the Shire again, despite the fact that Saruman has just tried to stab Frodo's like, no, don't kill him, and we live in this world where people have come to believe that empathy is a bad thing, that empathy is a threat to civilization, that it's a sin. And and a lot of the people who are talking this way are people who you would think should know better, because they profess certain religions, for certain, faith. And it's just like I came to the conclusion recently that there are people who believe that there are people who don't read the red words in the Bible because red means stop. And so that's why they never get any of the, do unto others stuff, because that's all in the red words,
Yeah,
and
the Sermon on the Mount, it's a bunch of hippy dippy nonsense.
yeah, yeah, woke, woke crap, and it's just like I don't know how, because I sat there, and I went to I went to religious school, from first grade through 12th grade, and all I see, all I remember is I don't remember us talking about the Old Testament like at all. It was just it was the gospel, the gospel, the gospel, and over and over and over again. And, it was all do unto others and, help the poor, welcome the migrant, and God is love. And, and it's like, then it's like, then I hear other people talking, and it's just like, are they reading the same book I'm reading? And so I don't know, and it's just, and so I think pity or empathy or whatever you want to call it, I think that sort of thing, that's the sort of thing you can learn, I think, from reading Tolkien. It's sort of thing you can there's lots, not just Tolkien, lots of things, lots of different types of fiction, can help, can develop, a sense of empathy, a sense of that we're all in this together. We're all human beings, whatever color we are, whatever race we are, whatever religion we are, whether we're rich or poor, or whatever continent we're from. It's like, good God, we're all in this together. Let's in why can't we just get along? And I just wish that more people would get that message from wherever, Tolkien, the Bible, Jane Austen. I don't. It doesn't matter who or where, but we're all human beings, and it's a very challenging time to be a human being right now. If you want to be a human being who's more than just, an ape on two legs. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I definitely think we can get that from Tolkien. Why is Lobelia a hero at the end of the book? Right? Because you know because she was pitied. Because people pitied her, and stuff like that. And uh, she turns out to be kind of like this like heroine. Gives Frodo his home back, and presumably the spoons as well. And so it's just I just don't. There's a lot of things I don't get in this world, and a lot of things I don't want to get in this world, but I don't really have much choice of it. But it's I guess we have to hope that uh, the as I think Lincoln put it, the better angels of our nature will prevail. But then again, it's like the better angels of our nature might decide they have to use the ring to control us. So, but anyway, it's a tough. The world's a tough place right now. And you, me, we're not the ones in the tough place. We're white guys. It's like, but as a but all those other people, at least as I was taught when I was going to church and school and stuff like that, are my brothers and sisters. and I'll be judged by how I treat them. So I try to treat them the way I'd like them to treat me. And for next week's sermon, we'll be talking about.
No, this I appreciate you sharing that, Tom, and like everything you're saying, I'm just like yes, 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 and I just going back to like the fellowship, right? The fellowship is a hodgepodge of people who are experiencing a difficult world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's issues, right? There's the classic dwarves and elves type thing, right? Boromir's pissed because Gondor's obviously been doing all the heavy lifting, in his view.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously he needs some help. But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, it's imperfect people coming together with a fool's hope to try to better their world. And like you said, if anybody can get that from anywhere, yeah, I hope people get it too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, Tom, this has been super fun.
Great.
I just am excited that I got to hang out with you. So, before we go, like tell people where they can find you on the internet, and then we'll sign off.
Well, I've got a blog at alasnotme.blogspot.com. I'm on Substack too, with pretty much the same name. I'm on Instagram, though I don't really do a whole lot on Instagram, not compared to some people. And so I'm in all of those places. You can find me in the Prancing Pony on Facebook group. I'm there too, and here and there. I've got the book, which is from Kent State University Press. I've got a couple of articles in Tolkien Studies. I've got a couple of articles in the Journal of Tolkien Research. I'm working on another book and some more articles, and hopefully before too long, some of them will see the light of day. Because I've been probably spending most of the last 3 years of my life with touring, and I don't know that that's actually probably good for me. Uh, so because I've been really heavily wrapped up in the Book of Lost Tales and the Lays of Beleriand for mostly since I sent in the last Pity and Power of Tolkien's Ring to be published. So I've been, and Turin is just taking the book over. It's just more. It's just like, okay, well, I got to break this chapter into 2 chapters now because it's too long. Yeah, Turin gets another chapter. So. But it's a chapter. It's the next book will be on a lot of what we talked about today. How the Book of Laws, how Tolkien's legendarium, especially in the first 20 years, like before he started writing The Lord of the Rings, how that asks and these questions about fate and free will and death and immortality and justice, divine justice, and the problem of evil, and how the great tales are involved in all of this, and Turin is Turin is all over the place, in the middle of it, to everything Turin, and I just want to take a vacation from Turin. Though I'm learning, I think, all sorts of really, really cool stuff, seeing all sorts of really cool and interesting things, and we'll have to see where it goes.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you doing this again. Everyone, for now, as you wait for Tom's work, go buy Pity, Power, and Tolkien's Ring, and Tom, I'm sure we'll hang out again soon.
Sure, hope so. Take care now.
Cool. Hey, you too, man.